You will hear an academic lecture on the history of the Olympic Games. As you listen, answer the multiple-choice questions on your exercise sheet. Some questions ask about facts from the lecture. Others ask what the speaker implies or suggests. Choose the best answer, A, B, C, or D, for each question.
Welcome back to Academic Listening Hub. Today we are looking at the Olympic Games, a subject with a history spanning nearly 3,000 years. We will move through that history in roughly chronological order, from the ancient games of Greece through to the modern era, and the political and commercial forces that shape the games today. As we go, I want you to think carefully about what the Olympics actually represent, because the answer is less straightforward than the official story suggests. The Olympic Games began in ancient Greece, at a sanctuary called Olympia in the western Peloponnese. The earliest recorded games took place in 776 BCE, though historians believe athletic competitions at the site may have started considerably earlier. The games were held in honor of Zeus, the king of the Greek gods, and took place every 4 years, a period the Greeks called an Olympiad. This 4-year cycle was significant enough that Greek historians used it as a unit of measurement, dating events by which Olympiad they fell in. The ancient games were quite different from their modern version. In the earlier centuries, there was only one event, a foot race of approximately 192 meters, known as the stadion, the word from which we get stadium. Over time, other events were added: longer foot races, wrestling, the discus, the javelin, the long jump, and the pentathlon. There were no team sports and no medals. Winners received a crown of olive branches cut from a sacred tree near the Temple of Zeus. The reward was symbolic rather than material, but the status it brought was enormous. Victors were celebrated as heroes, and some received lifelong privileges from their home city-states, including free meals for life. One of the most distinctive features of the ancient Olympics was the Ekecheiria, a sacred truce declared across the Greek world for the duration of the games. City-states at war were expected to pause hostilities, and athletes and spectators were guaranteed safe passage to and from Olympia. The truce was not always perfectly observed, but it represented a remarkable idea: that athletic competition could, at least temporarily, rise above political conflict. It is an idea that has proved both remarkably lasting and remarkably difficult to put into practice. The ancient games continued for over 1,000 years, but declined significantly after Greece came under Roman rule. In 393 CE, the Emperor Theodosius I, a Christian, banned the games as a pagan festival. The site at Olympia fell into ruin, buried under centuries of floods and earthquakes, and was largely forgotten in the Western world. The idea of reviving the Olympics was discussed in Europe during the 18th and 19th centuries, but it was a French nobleman named Pierre de Coubertin who made it a reality. Coubertin was strongly influenced by visits to British public schools, where he saw the importance placed on team sports and physical education. He believed that what he saw as the moral and physical decline of French society, particularly after France's defeat in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870, could be addressed through athletic development. The Olympics, he felt, could promote international understanding and the idea that physical strength and moral character were closely connected. Coubertin founded the International Olympic Committee in 1894. And the first modern Olympic Games were held in Athens in 1896. By today's standards, they were modest. 14 nations took part, all events were for men only, and the total number of athletes was around 241. There were no opening ceremonies as we know them, no Olympic torch relay, and no standard medal system. Winners received silver medals and olive branches, while runners-up received bronze. Gold medals were not introduced until the 1904 Games in St. Louis. The early modern Olympics were marked by considerable disorganization. The 1900 Games in Paris were so poorly run that many athletes did not realize they had competed in the Olympics at all. The events were spread across several months and embedded within a World's Fair. The 1904 Games in St. Louis were similarly chaotic and so heavily dominated by American athletes that international participation was almost negligible. It was not until the 1908 Games in London that the Olympics began to look like the structured international event we recognize today. As the Games grew in scale and global visibility, they became increasingly entangled with politics, despite the Olympic Charter's position that sport and politics must remain separate. The 1936 Games in Berlin are perhaps the most well-known example. Hosted by Nazi Germany, the Games were used by Adolf Hitler as a showcase for the supposed superiority of the Aryan race. The International Olympic Committee's decision to award the Games to Berlin has been criticized ever since as a catastrophic failure of political judgment. Yet the Games also produced one of the most celebrated moments in Olympic history. Jesse Owens, an African-American athlete, won 4 gold medals in front of Hitler, directly contradicting the ideology the Games were meant to promote. The Cold War brought a new kind of political tension to the Olympics. The 1980 Games in Moscow were boycotted by the United States and around 60 other nations in protest at the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. 4 years later, the Soviet Union and its allies boycotted the 1984 Games in Los Angeles. These boycotts damaged the Games significantly and raised serious questions about whether the Olympic ideal of universal participation was ever more than a convenient idea. Other political moments have left lasting marks on the Games. At the 1968 Mexico City Games, American athletes Tommy Smith and John Carlos raised their fists on the podium in protest against racial inequality in the United States, a gesture that resulted in their expulsion from the Olympic Village. And the 1972 Munich Games were overshadowed by the killing of 11 Israeli athletes and coaches by members of the Palestinian militant group Black September, an event that permanently changed security arrangements at the Olympics. Perhaps the most significant transformation in the modern Olympics has been commercial. Until the 1980s, the Games operated on a relatively modest budget and maintained a strict commitment to amateurism. Professional athletes were not permitted to compete. This began to change with the 1984 Los Angeles Games, which were the first to be privately financed and turned a significant profit through corporate sponsorship and television rights. The success of the LA Games fundamentally changed the economics of the Olympics, and amateurism was progressively dropped through the late 1980s and 1990s. Today, the Olympic Games are one of the most commercially valuable events in the world. Television rights alone generate billions of dollars per cycle, and the Olympic rings are among the most widely recognized brand symbols on the planet. The IOC distributes a share of this revenue to national Olympic committees and international sports federations. But critics argue that the financial benefits are unevenly spread and that the costs of hosting, which typically involve enormous investment in infrastructure, fall disproportionately on host cities and their taxpayers. Several cities have withdrawn bids in recent years after their populations voted against hosting, citing concerns about cost and the long-term use of Olympic facilities. The Olympic Games, then, are not simply a celebration of athletic achievement. They are a mirror held up to the world, reflecting its ideals, its conflicts, its inequalities, and its contradictions. Understanding their history is not just a matter of knowing sporting facts. It is a way of understanding how human societies have used, and at times misused, the idea of universal competition in the service of very particular interests.
All right, it is time to test your notes. Answer the following questions and check your score. Good luck! That concludes today's listening session. To stay updated with our next videos, make sure to subscribe. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye for now.